For the first time in so many years, we come into a Champions League with loads of fixtures, loads of things going on. But for the first time, I'd say, as a Liverpool fan, Liverpool aren't being talked about as favourites, potential winners. It feels like a little bit of a free hit for Arne Slot and this pretty small Liverpool squad. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Because they've always been like the underdogs to chase the Champions League down.
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing. And I think when a manager comes into a team who's already in quite a lot of the big competitions, not having an expectation to win any of them or all of them can only be a positive thing. I think with Slot, he will probably decide at some point, because as you mentioned, the squad is quite small. It's a little bit unlikely that Liverpool will be able to win the league and win the Champions League, I feel. And I think he could use a lot of the Champions League fixtures as a little bit of an experiment to bring in certain different players who might not be playing in the league all the time. We know from the last 3 games he's kind of got his preferred 11, don't we? So Champions League can be an excuse for him to kind of rotate and see what different players are about, and potentially just, assess different styles and different options of playing, because I don't think that he or the players really themselves will think, okay, we're going to win the league and we're going to win the Champions League. I think that they can go into this very free, and that often results in, as you say, the underdogs coming out on top, or just a kind of a lack of emotion towards the game, which just allows that an expression of freedom. I don't see why it would be a bad thing.
Yeah, I never think that Liverpool in the Champions League is ever a free hit. During the international break, they asked selected England players, what's the best atmosphere, what's the best ground to play at, and a lot of them who didn't play for Liverpool said Anfield. Anfield under the lights is a different animal, and in my lifetime, I think Liverpool played in 5 Champions League finals. It pales in significance to Real Madrid, but that's a lot of Champions League finals in the last, I think, 20 years. And so Liverpool are a different animal when it comes to Champions League, because Anfield does come alive, and I think that gives them such a marked advantage, especially in the knockout stages. And so we can paint it right now as this a free hit, but when Liverpool get out of their group, which they should do, despite the fact that it's actually a pretty tough group, or a pretty tough run of fixtures, I think that Liverpool in the knockout stages will be dangerous for anybody, and nobody will want to draw Liverpool in the Champions League.
I agree with that. I think that's completely normal. It's sort of like even teams like AC Milan, who've got like the heritage, Liverpool play them first. They're not a very good side anymore, and they haven't been for a long time. But because of the Champions League heritage, people still carry that around, and Liverpool will carry that into the Champions League in any fixture. Probably the only team that don't care about playing Liverpool is Madrid. Every other team will be like, we don't fancy Liverpool. The one thing I want to come back to is that sort of lack of rotation with Arne Slot. It feels like he knows exactly what he wants in this side. Liverpool have loads of options going forward, but then defensively and with all the fixtures, I think that's the key thing here. Liverpool play Milan, Bologna, Leipzig, Leverkusen, Madrid, Girona, Lille and PSV. It doesn't really get easy until the last couple of games, and I wouldn't call them easy either. These are 8 big games. If you're Arne Slot, are you going to rotate and flip back to the usual 11? Because I also think that causes problems in itself as well. Sometimes playing the same 11 every week and midweek is a really good thing.
Yeah, well, I think previously you'd say that you play your strongest team in the Champions League as strong as possible until the final couple of games where you know you're through already. But with the increased amount of games in the group stage of the Champions League, it's changed the dynamics completely, and now you're going to see rotation. You might see Liverpool versus Real Madrid where the sides rotate, which you mentioned it off air. It kind of waters it down a little bit, but you are going to have to really manage your squad in the Champions League this year and going forward, because it's so many games. It's too many games, really. And it's a Liverpool team that are trying to find their feet. I think they landed on magic with Gravenberch and CDM. I mean, you talked about him as the number 6, and we mentioned how he might come into some issues when they play against the better teams. But I feel like a player who's got such a high ceiling, I think that he's going to develop and become even better as a result of playing against really good teams in the Champions League. He's going to come up against Real Madrid and see what it's really like to play at the top level, which will only benefit him. But I think for Liverpool, where this midfield was probably the biggest question before the season, that might be what holds them back a little bit in the Champions League, where games are won and lost in midfield.
Let's talk about Endo. Endo's still there, and he's our boy. Another player that I think could have a really interesting period now in the Champions League is Darwin Nunez, because it feels like Liverpool's front three is Salah, Jota and Diaz. Chiesa now in the mix as well. Then also Gakpo in the mix. Darwin he feels like the 6th option, actually, the 5th or 6th option, which is quite mad to say, because when he arrived, a lot of people were saying this is Liverpool's next big number 9, because Liverpool had so many. The Champions League could be his calling card. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's quite interesting what you said, and I don't actually agree with that Champions League games are won and lost in midfield. I actually kind of think the opposite. I think a lot of the time what we've seen with Real Madrid over the last few years is they've just had an extremely potent attack, and a pretty solid defence. We know that Liverpool have that solid defence. They've got probably, as I hate to admit it, probably the best defender in the world in Virgil van Dijk. They've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, incredible player, and then they've got that front three, an incredibly quick front three. And I think that pace and that power is what wins you Champions League games, and that is kind of what separates the teams who, for example, City, who didn't win the Champions League for the first 6 years under Pep Guardiola, because they didn't really have that. I would say that a lot of those seasons when they were competing, they probably had the better team overall. They probably had the best team in Europe, but they didn't win because they didn't have players who could perform in those individual moments. Darwin Nunez is exactly that type of player. He's incredibly quick, he's incredibly powerful, and he's got an unbelievable shot. Partner that with Chiesa, who's got experience in the competition, and Salah, who is Mohamed Salah. Not much more needs to be said about that. That's a really potent front three, and I think in cup competitions, that definitely could progress you through the rounds for sure.
I think I kind of agree with both, to be fair. I think that midfields can win you games, but I think when you look at the fixtures, and I'm looking at October in particular, Liverpool have Bologna away, Palace at home, Chelsea away, Leipzig away, Arsenal away. I think in that period is where a manager like Slot, Liverpool have been clinical so far, goes, who's going to bag me a few goals in the game against Bologna and get us out of jail? Who can do the same against Chelsea? And then can we play, quote-unquote, properly against Palace, Arsenal and Leipzig? Yeah. And I think that's where someone like Darwin Nunez could have a huge impact this season.